Tony White is moving on from Nebraska. Dana Holgorsen is staying. That's the good news. But with Tony White moving on, we are bringing in our Nebraska podcast from the College Huddle, TJ from the Common Fan, where they talk everything Nebraska football, everything going on over there. So if you want to know more about Nebraska football, you go on and check them out over there. TJ, before we get started, just tell people where they can find the Common Fan podcast.
Yeah, sure. Appreciate that, JR. Common Fan podcast. We are on YouTube and we are everywhere you get your podcasts. You can see it all. One-stop shop, commonfan.co, commonfan.co. We also have been putting out regular written content multiple times a week during the football season, and we're going to try to keep up on that at least once or twice a week in the off season. So appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. Get your full coverage of Nebraska football over there. All right, TJ. So the big thing that everybody is wondering about is this whole Tony White situation. Tony White is moving on, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the defensive line coach is moving on with him to Florida State as well, correct?
So I've seen it confirmed about White. The assumption is, or the rumor is, that Terrence Knighton, pot roast as he's known, it will be moving on as well. Although I have not seen that as as firm as what we've seen with White. But yeah, Tony White is moving on to Florida State. I mean, he's held in high regard by the Nebraska fan base. I would say, Coach Rhule came in, and obviously there's still issues to fix with this program. He went 5-7 in year one, 6-6 in year two. I think the second year especially was a little bit of a disappointment in some ways to fans, but a bright spot has been the defense. And Tony White's had a top 20 defense the last 2 years. And really, I mean, they flipped the defense immediately upon arrival. And so, I mean, that stings. It hurts. I got to be honest with you, JR. I'm telling myself, maybe it's just like overdone, how everything is overdone these days. And
right.
Between the outrage over the weekend on all the rivalry games, and then all the Twitter insanity about every time an announcement is made. It's 2024. Coaches are going to leave. I think it's a loss for Nebraska, no doubt. But Tony White has been open about how he wanted to be a head coach as well. So I think Husker fans felt lucky to get him back for year two. I, for one, am a little, confused that it's a something of a lateral move. I mean, I know Florida State has been, in the playoff and in playing for national championships more recently than Nebraska, but that situation doesn't look very stable right now. So a little confused about going to be a DC somewhere else, but you got to figure if he can do it at a place like Nebraska and then do it at a place like Florida State, that probably helps burnish the resume for a head coaching job. And I would imagine they're paying it. I would assume Nebraska would match most offers, but I mean, who knows what they're, I'll be interested to see what they end up paying him.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of Nebraska or a lot of money in that Nebraska football program. So I never felt like money was probably the object there of what he was moving on for. My only thought was perhaps Florida State just has a better opportunity to maybe get into the playoffs with it being less competition in the ACC and what they can do. But then again, they've only won one game so far this season and they're in the ACC. So I don't know what that really means for that, but
yeah, I don't know. I mean, you could look at it either way, right? I mean, the Big Ten, arguably, you're going to have 3 or 4 teams in every year, whereas the ACC is at best the third best conference. And so they'll have 1, maybe 2 teams in. I don't know. Who knows? Tony White knows more about what he wants for his future than I do. So I'm sure he's got lots of good reasons for it. It stinks for the Huskers. I think the fan base is flipping out a little bit over the top. Like, I don't want to sound crass, but in 2024, it's easier than ever to replace coaches and players. And so maybe that's just me telling myself that to feel better. But you got it. Like, this is just the world we live in.
Yeah. No, I feel you. Anytime you get through a coaching change, especially a coach as beloved as Tony White seemed to be for Nebraska, it's definitely something that the fan base has to work through, and we'll see if Matt Rhule can get it right. Speaking of Matt Rhule getting it right, let's talk some candidates. Who are some maybe candidates out there that are already at other programs or maybe potentially could come in from somewhere else to possibly be a defensive coordinator replacement for Tony White? And then if you do know, like, do you think this will be kind of like a fast transition? Do you think this will take maybe a few months? I mean, let's hope it's not an Iowa offensive coordinator situation where it takes like 3 months, right?
Right, right,
to
right.
figure it out. But I've seen these things turn around as quick as a week. So
Yeah.
what's your thoughts on timetable and then other people that could possibly get the job?
I mean, so everything is speculation right now. I will say that. I mean, I don't have any inside intel. I think most people, if they tell you they know what's going on, they're lying. So I think, it's interesting. Phil Snow is a guy who was with Rhule at Baylor and at Temple and at the Carolina Panthers, who has been his defensive coordinator before. And I think he's an analyst for the Bears now or something. That's a name that some people Rhule earlier this year after the loss to UCLA brought in Holgerson as a sort of an analyst, a consultant on the offensive side, and Phil Snow on the defensive side. So Phil Snow is a name that's out there. There's even some suggestion that kind of rubbed Tony White the wrong way. I feel like White and Rhule are pretty close, and Rhule's been very supportive of Tony White. So I don't know if that really would have led him to leave, but I could see him being irritated by that because the defense wasn't the problem. So Phil Snow's a name out there. I'm not sure if this is anywhere beyond my text chat with my high school buddies, but people are throwing out Dave Aranda just because, he's, potentially on the hot seat as a head coach and, has been an excellent defensive coordinator before,
Right.
especially in the Big Ten. So who knows though? I think the other names to watch are internal hires. And there's John Butler is our defensive backs coach. He came from the Buffalo Bills in the offseason and has been a defensive coordinator before. There's some speculation that maybe Butler's in line for the job. I don't know for sure about that. And then, some of the other assistants, Rob Dvorak, I'm probably saying that name wrong, is the linebackers coach who's done an excellent job and really young guy. I doubt I think he's got a really bright future. I don't know that he's ready to be a coordinator, and I really wouldn't be surprised if Rhule. I wouldn't be surprised if Rhule tried to pull up Dana Holgerson on the defensive side of the ball, like go out and get somebody outside of the program who's proven and done it before. Now I don't know who that is, but and sorry, to your point on timing, I really do think so. Last year, Tony White was interviewing for head coaching jobs. He interviewed at
The UCLA job
UCLA.
was the biggest one that I remember.
Yeah, I think he interviewed at Syracuse. I know USC made a run at him to be their defensive coordinator, and Rhule was openly supportive. Basically, like if young coaches come work for me and they're getting bigger and better jobs, then I'm doing my job. So he was openly supportive of that. And again, that's why I think that relationship between Rhule and White is pretty solid because White really appreciated that. But point where I'm going with this is Rhule has known that Tony White wants to be a head coach. So I have to assume, whether or not he knew this was coming, the Florida State thing, I don't know. Maybe we'll find out when he does the signing day press conference. Maybe we won't. But he has to have given this some thought. He has to have had something of a plan constructed in his head, knowing that Tony White could be leaving, because he almost left last year. So I do tend to think maybe it'll move quicker. I don't think it'll be the 3-month Iowa offensive coordinator approach, but who knows?
I almost feel like it has to move quicker with signing day this Wednesday. You don't want to lose a bunch of recruits and stuff like that. I didn't tell you I'd ask this, but now I'm just curious based on our conversation. I mean, do you think this is a situation where Nebraska could lose out on maybe a couple recruits with Tony White moving on? Maybe they think about going to Florida State instead. I mean, that always has to be considered when coaches move on as well. What are you thinking? What are you feeling there in that area?
Yeah, I don't have a good sense on the recruiting side. We've seen multiple guys enter the portal just today, two of which are losses. Jamari Butler, who is a junior this year, he's been really solid on the defensive line. And then Mekhi Bayer, like right before I came on to record this with you, I just saw Mekhi Bayer, who's been a starting linebacker and had a really good year as well. Both announced they're going into the portal. So you have to, especially Butler, with the rumor that Terrence Knighton, the defensive line coach, also going to FSU. You have to wonder if Jamari Butler is going to be following them to Florida State. Maybe the same is true of Bayer. I mean, neither of those guys are guys you would have expected to leave if everything was staying the same. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
But again, so I do wonder, you don't want to lose half the defense, but the fact is we're losing a bunch of guys who are out of eligibility anyway. And as we all know, the portal is going to be flooded with thousands of guys, right?
Yep.
And so you hate to see it, but again, it's kind of where we are in college football, and hopefully we can replace whoever leaves. But I am interested / a little bit nervous to see, because there's been some smoke in a positive direction about potential flips that are coming our way on signing day, but most of those have been on the offensive side of the ball. So I don't know how much the Tony White thing will impact that, but you worry about losing guys who are already in the boat, who are already committed, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think in today's day and age, if you're a program like Nebraska, a Big Ten program, you you can't go with an internal hire. This is just me personally, my thought process. You can't go with an internal hire, and you can't go with like an analyst or something like that at another school, because you want to have somebody come in who can bring guys with them, right? Like I've said this before about Ryan Walters going to Purdue. He didn't bring a whole bunch of guys with him from Illinois because they wanted to stick around Aaron Henry and Brett Bielema over there. And so you brought in Ryan Walters, and Ryan Walters had to basically build everything. He couldn't bring any guys with him. One of the best things that Kirk Cinetti did at Indiana was he brought half his defense with him and turned Indiana into a really good defense, because he had a whole bunch of guys who knew the system, knew the culture, and brought them in with him. Now, obviously, the defensive coordinator is not going to be setting a whole new culture for the team, but if you bring in somebody who maybe is a head coach at the Group of 5 level, or you bring in somebody who is a defensive coordinator at Big 12, or even somebody like Dave Aranda, if he gets let go at Baylor, you have the opportunity to bring in some of his players that were maybe star players that could come in and be a part of the Nebraska defense as well. So if I'm a Nebraska fan, that's what I'm looking for more than anything else. I get what Matt Rhule wants to do with bringing in young guys and stuff like that, but that's my pitch is like, hey, if you're a young guy someplace else, like move a step up, come here, and then we'll help get you a job, because look what Tony White did. He almost got the job at UCLA and stuff like that. So,
Well,
go ahead.
Go ahead. I have a response. I have something to say that, but I wonder if it's going to lean toward your next question anyway. So go ahead.
Well, I was going to shift gears from there. So you go ahead and if we get there, we get there.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I don't want to scoop your next question, but so I think to your point also, Rhule came in, and in the fall of 22, we hired him right after Frost, because Frost got let go early in that season, and we had interim coach for the rest of the year. Rhule initially hired a lot of guys that he knew and was comfortable with, right? One of those is offensive coordinator Marcus Satterfield, who just got replaced by Dana Holgorsen 9 games into the season, right?
Yeah, great decision.
Great decision to immediate results, right? So I think I heard, this is not my original thought, but I heard somebody make the point that it's kind of like a company where you're opening up an office in a new city, and sometimes the team that you send out to open up the office isn't the same team that you're going to have run the office long term. And I think I wouldn't say that Rhule's on the hot seat, but I will say we had 4 more 1-score losses this year, 2 of which that fans feel like we absolutely should have won in Illinois and Iowa. So I think there's a little bit, even if we go win the bowl game, when all the dust settles after bowl season, I think there's going to be a little bit of disappointment that in year 2 of Matt Rhule, with a lot of veteran guys, especially on defense, we only improved by 1 game, and we only got to 6-6. So I think Rhule feels that, and he's kind of reached the point where he's got his feet under him in Lincoln. He's figured some things out. He's figured some things out in the Big Ten, and he will do whatever it takes to try to turn this thing into a winner and make it work. So to your point about a defensive coordinator, that would suggest he's going to go get somebody who's done it before and done it well and done it successfully. And if it has the added benefit of being able to bring 2 or 4 or 6 guys with him, then that would be huge for the Huskers, right?
Right.
Oh, and another name people, this is totally Twitter, by the way, but to go back here, another name people have thrown out there is Jim Leonard.
Oh,
but
his name's always out there.
Yeah, he's not a guy who at the moment, I don't think, could bring guys with him, but I think Husker fans would be thrilled with Jim Leonard.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he's a name that would attract players,
Right.
if nothing else. So maybe he
Yeah.
wouldn't bring a whole bunch with him, but there would definitely be some players in the portal that would hear that name and say, "Ooh, let me take a look at Nebraska now and see what they got going on over there."
Totally.
So, yeah, that definitely leads me into my next question, which is so like I don't think this is exactly the same, but I'm going to compare it to it, and then you kind of lead me from there. So Luke Fickell fired Phil Longo, Tony White leaves Matt Rhule. Do you think this is a similar situation with Luke Fickell finding an offensive coordinator to the part, obviously, that he didn't fire him, but to the part of like Matt Rhule needs to get this hire right, because if he doesn't get this hire right, you're looking at another 5-7, 6-6 season. And if that happens next year, I mean, I don't think Matt Rhule is going to get fired, but I think the seat is going to be insanely hot if they go 6-6 again next year. And it's going to be at the point where it's like, look, buddy, you improve things real fast. Otherwise, we're going to be moving on from you pretty quick into the season next year if we don't like what we see. Would you agree that's kind of the same sentiment, or are you kind of like, no, I think he has a little bit of room here for it. What do you think?
No, I think that's spot on, JR. I think that folks are still like, I would say the fan base is 90-95% on board with Rule, right? I think people believe this still is an improvement. The program has been in the worst place arguably in its history. And so, what's step one? Step one is getting back to a bowl game, right? But I think if we don't, Rule has had a year 3 leap at Temple and Baylor in both of those rebuilds. And if we don't see that, if Husker fans don't say, now what does that mean? That doesn't necessarily mean the playoff, but I think there's a sense of urgency with Dylan Raiola, going to be a sophomore already. And the clock feels like it's ticking for your with your 5-star quarterback. And just, it's going to be year 3 for all, so many reasons. I think, you're exactly right. If he goes 6-6 again, if he missed a bowl game, it would be bad.
Yeah.
Well, 6-6, even 7-5, I think people are going to be like, okay, like, are we going to be PJ Fleck in Minnesota forever? And I know like other fans of other programs are going to roll their eyes, and Nebraska's been bad for a decade, and that's fine. That's fair. That's true. But like Husker fans still have the expectation of, I don't think people think the 90s are coming back anytime soon, but there's no reason with the resources and fan support and all the things that you have in Lincoln, there's no reason you can't be, winning 8 to 10 games every year. There's no reason we can't have a coach that comes in and does that. And so I think your assessment is spot on. And, I think people, especially with all the churn, there's going to be so much to talk about this offseason. And Holgorsen, that news offsetting the Tony White departure is big. I think we're going to have a pretty good signing day. We're going to have a pretty good recruiting class. Probably get some transfer portal guys. Again, everybody's going to get excited about whoever the new DC is, especially if he's somebody from the outside. There's going to be plenty to talk about and keep people excited. But I think we've got to see it on the field this next year. And honestly, like, again, Husker fans are not crazy. I think most fans were predicting 7-5 or 8-4 this year. And if you look at some of the games we lost, that was right there. It's so funny. Like, you look at that Iowa game, and Nebraska dominated in every way except the one that matters, which is the scoreboard. Right. So if you don't trip over your appendage and lose that game and hand that game away, they're 7-5 with the chance to end the season 8-5, and everyone's thrilled, right? So it's just funny how thin the line is, how close, how close that is to, one way or the other. So I think Rhule, to answer your question, I think Rhule has figured some things out. He's feeling a little more urgency and probably a little more willing to say, he kind of defended Satterfield, and to his credit, right? I mean, he made the move that he made with Holgorsen. Right. It was the right move, but publicly, has never sort of crapped on Satterfield because he's a good man, and those guys have coached together for a long time. But I think at the end of 2023, let's say, I don't think we would have seen some of these moves, right? I think he's feeling a little more urgency and realizing he's got to do whatever he can do to make this successful.
I think that's great insight. Thanks so much, TJ, for coming on and talking about this whole situation for us. I know that the listeners and viewers here at the Big Ten Huddle are going to appreciate that. Why don't you tell people one more time where they can find Common Fan?
Yeah, find us on YouTube. Just search Common Fan Podcast, or you can find YouTube, audio, and written stuff, all at commonfan.co. That's commonfan.co. Check us out. We'd love to have you subscribe on YouTube. And thanks so much for having me, JR.
No problem. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. We appreciate it. Have a good one.